Alright, so hello everyone. Today I'm going to talk to you about the Enyo 2 framework. So first I'm going to present myself. I'm Philippe. I'm working in a software service company called Enyo, and my main field of work are Unix administration and PHP, and we are enhancing our offers for mobile devices. So we have started to develop some hybrid applications. And here is an overview of what we are going to talk about. So we are going to present the Enyo framework, where it comes from, and how to design an application and how to deploy it. So what is Enyo? So there are many JavaScript UI frameworks, and why this one? So it comes from the WebOS experience. It's not very well known, but it was used on. It comes from the Palm devices. So it benefits from several years of experience as a JavaScript UI on mobile devices, and it also now it has become from open source, so it's a model that has some benefits. And the first version of Enyo is a framework WebOS 3, where it's built open, succeeding to the Mojo framework. So it was used on the HP touchpad tablet. Maybe you know it because it was for sale several years ago. It has been dropped very abruptly by HP, which decided to cease its mobile activity. However, it was the occasion of a rebirth, as the new Enyo 2 now work on several devices, on desktop devices. So now let's consider several ways of implementing mobile UIs using HTML5. So most ones are declarative, just one Dojo Mobile we just saw at the previous presentation. That means you will use HTML as a base and enhance existing markups. So here is the first example. Here you just are using a template, as you would use a Smarty, for example, with PHP. And the variables here will be replaced. So this is usable, for example, if you have mockup that a designer has provided you, and you want to push it very quickly. So here is a second way to do this. So this is decorative, just like in the previous presentation. You have some HTML markups here, and you enhance it with some attributes, such as data Dojo type. So these attributes will be rendered correctly thanks to these attributes. The problem with it would be if you want to compose these components. For example, you want to have a toolbar with several widgets in it you want to define. So to solve this problem, you would use a programmatic way, just like you compose a program. So this is just a regular sequence of instructions. So now let's consider how you would do it with Enyo. With Enyo, you would have an approach that is quite similar to Sencha Touch or EXT.js. That means the UI component definition resides within the application code, but it uses a declarative configuration object. In this way, HTML can be used, but in fact it's seldom used, and there is no template here. The way each component should be rendered is determined by its kind. The kind is like a class, but as class already exists in CSS, the word kind is used to avoid confusion. This configuration object does not match the result structure. That means, for example, in this example, a dot component, despite being used in the configuration object, will be undefined. You will have to use the dollar instead. So we'll see an example a bit later. You also can, of course, use the programmatic way to define your components. This can be very handy if you have to, if you need some dynamic components. If you have to compose your UI dynamically. So now let's see a bit visually how it renders. So you have the fitables that are that can be grids or things like that. It means it will compose the available space. Right? And what's interesting here is that you can have some rows. For example, you decide that one row will take most of the available part of your screen. That means if your screen is bigger or smaller, it will be bigger or smaller, and it's a way to implement responsive design. So the UI can adapt itself. So you have some panels. So in web-based application, panels are very often used because you can swap panels, and then it means for example, you have two panels on the left to choose some categories of messages, for example, and you can swipe on display what is interesting, the part you want to see by hiding panels after sliding them. And of course, you have some standard widgets, some buttons in this example. So in the heart of Enyo is used the coding by convention paradigm. So it's quite like the ones that would be used in Ruby on Rails. For example, kind instances names will implicitly have the first letter lowercase by default. If you don't specify anything, that means there will be some things that will be generated automatically by convention. So as there is a convention, it is convenient to know what will be used, and it makes less code. Now let's see how Enyo plays with OOP. Inheritance, a definition of inheritance can be a way to establish is a relationship between objects. So we saw that a kind is a class. So inheritance is implemented using the kind factory function. That means you will use the kind function to produce a subkind. So that means a class. And in this kind, superkind that are like super in Java, methods are callable using this .inherited. So let's head on to an example. In this example, my desired kind inherits from my kind, and calling this .inherited calls the ancestors function. So let's consider now how it plays with composition. So object composition is a way to combine simple objects into more complex ones. Components are the way to express ownership relations here. We can note that here the DORA has nothing to do with jQuery's DORA, of course, and nested DORA structures, they don't reflect the DOM. That means if you have a single component with a div inside a div, in the Enyo relation, in the Enyo hierarchy, that they will be at the same level. So now let's consider an example. Here the application, the app contains a button and a scroller. The scroller itself contains a component named main, and the button kind component instance is named button by convention, just like I was saying before. The first letter is lowercase, and it is accessed through the $iterator. So you can see how what it can. So now let's see how it plays with encapsulation. One of the definitions of encapsulation that would fit to Enyo is the following. So it enhances bundling of data with a method, so you can bundle structure and you have helpers that will be generated to manipulate the data. So this is not the encapsulation in the sense of hiding things like you would have in traditional languages. So there is no access restrictions, but instead there is a wrapping mechanism with a bunch of helpers. So in Enyo, properties can this way be published. When a property is published, it means that accessors will be generated. You will have some getters and setters accessors, and a change function that will be triggered after each set has been called if the value are changed. So that way you can have your UI content match the published values changes. So let's see an example. So here we can observe that my value is published. Therefore, get my value and set my value as generated automatically. And after set my value is called, and if the value is different, my change value will be called automatically. Okay, so now let's see how Enyo plays with events. So events are useful to decouple layers and entities that are manipulated. That means you can. Thank you. And so you have, for events, you have a consistent event callback structure in which in-sender contain a reference to the component that triggered the event, whereas event can contain information about the data to be transmitted in the event recipient. So you have several types of events that you can manipulate. So the first one is bubbling, just like in the standard document object model. Bubbling events propagate through owner components. It comes from the Microsoft implementation of event handling, and it's a default behavior of DOM event listeners. So here is the first example. In this example, we have a button which is called Sun, and it sends an on-tap event when it is tapped, just like you press the button. And it is associated to its counternos on-tap function that will handle this event. So in this example, we can see that you can implicitly place the event handler within the owner object of the emitter. So this is implicit. Now we can observe an explicit example. Here you can observe that there is a new section called handlers. So in this example there is a tank that contains a pump, and the pump bubbles the onEmit event, and it is explicitly handled by the executeEmit function through the handlers object. Another kind of events is a waterfall. It is exactly the opposite to bubble events. They propagate through owned components. Waterfall is similar to the capturing events implementation that comes from Netscape. It can only be used by DOM event listeners when setting the use capture parameter to true. So in this code snippet, we have an object named sender. It does contain another object named receiver, and it handles the onDrop event. So when waterfall, the onDrop event is caught by the associated executeDrop function. So last example is signals. So signals are broadcasted through all the DOM, so it shouldn't be overused because it can be quite bad for performance. It is a possibility to handle keyboard events, for example, and to use it you must include a component of kind signals in your code. So here is a code example. In this example, so there is a receiver kind definition that can handle the on-transmission signal event. This event is sent through the static kind signals without consideration about any hierarchy, and it is sent to every object to reach those that can handle it. Hopefully the return true statement will stop the event's propagation, just like in standard DOM. Okay, so now let's consider the Enyo bootplate. It is simply the Enyo boilerplate you can start developing an application from. Here is an example of how you could organize your projects. So in this example, ViewModel wrappers and corresponding UI components are stored in subfolders or source while independent layers elements are stored in lib. So this is a typical structure of an Enyo project without the MVC. How to add an external library? So to do that, you just have to copy the external library content to the lib directory and the library's entry point to source/package.js. It will be useful if it contains multiple files of directory to add package.js inside, because it can be referenced in this single entry points. So here is a code example of what would be in package.js. So it references the submodules. And in the next steps, we will be using Launcher as a data layer. It is, of course, not part of Enyo. It is used as a storage backend here. It is very practical because it can play together with desktop navigators and mobile navigators. And Enyo could be used too with MVC through Backbone, but it's not in this presentation scope. So now let's consider how we would manipulate data. So without MVC, Enyo would use the ViewModel pattern, but quite differently for any other framework that would be WPF or Knockout. These ones do bind directly elements to the ViewModel, and this is quite not the case with Enyo. So in our example, we'll access to data through a view model object. And this view model object will wrap data and be manipulated as a published attribute of the component. So we could have also used the REST web service as well. So let's see how to code this. So we will create a JS file that sits next to the view file and program a wrapper to data structure, and it will be our view model here. So in the following example, data contained in record is formatted for launcher, and messages contain data usable by our UI, which is a simple array because it is to be more simple. So we just push data and pull data. In this first example, the push function is used to save data to the local storage through launcher. Actually, in our simple example, it's only done when you're initializing the database. And we have a pull function here that gets data from the database. So what's interesting here is that we can have this data published. So this piece of code here is a piece of code within Enyo. So here the messages are published. And that means that the messages changed function is called just after the set messages has been called. So when the data has changed, it directly impacts the UI. So here, when a button is tapped, the enyo.bind is used to avoid that equals this variable, and this context is preserved here. So now let's see how we would deploy an application. We could simply deploy as a web application, and in some cases it can be sufficient for customers who don't want to deploy the application directly on different devices, and assume that an internet connection is always available. So for this we just have to call a little script called deploy, and this you don't need to configure anything. It will generate an optimized version of your application. So you could also deploy it the mobile application. So here is a representation of how Cordova works. It provides a unified toolchain for BlackBerry iOS and Android, and now to WP8 Windows Phone 2. And the yellow bubble here is just a browser instance. It will display the application, and that way JavaScript code will be executed, and it can actually access to native devices using the bridge. In previous versions of Cordova, you would have to you can't use this toolchain for Windows 8, but it's possible in the newest versions. So the tools you need to do that are the SDK for each platform and Cordova client wrapper. So Cordova client is a node application that will handle the deployment. So the steps would be to deploy the new application with the deploy.sh script within before, create the application on our target platforms, and build these target platform applications, and transcript it into shell commands that would be you call Cordova create, which will create the project. Then you just have to go to your application and use deploy to create your application, HTML5 application. And then the O here means that it will be deployed into the Cordova project. And after that, Cordova can handle the application generation. So you would have a platform. Here is in this example you have Android, but it could also be iOS. And you just build your application and install it just like any Android application here. So for a visual example, so here is how it looks in an iPhone emulator, in a WP8 emulator, and a real Android phone. So to debug your application, it can be very handy to use the PhoneGap emulator to handle fixed programs related to display size. It also provides simulation for most PhoneGap functions to access hardware. And you can also use a debugger inside the mobile device, as debugging HTML5 applications on mobile devices can be a real pain. So WinRAR stands for Web Inspector Remote, and it can control your JavaScript code on the device remotely. And it can provide you something very much like Firebug when the application runs on your device. So here is what instructions what steps you would do to do that. So WinRAR is available as an NPM package. So you just have to launch it and point your browser to the server here, and you rebuild your application. So, as a conclusion, what would Enyo bring you? So it implements responsive design. It has good performance, and it encapsulates the DOM, and it can use MVC. So why it's interesting? Because this approach suits the idea of developing a world self-sufficient application rather than tweaking or applying effects on web pages. And you wouldn't have to touch the DOM when using this framework. So here is an example of how responsive design would appear. So you can see that the sliders are the same on the mobile application, on the desktop application. So that means that the application can run on mobile applications and desktop applications with exactly the same code. So you have the same set of widgets, and you don't have to write the code twice for desktop and for mobiles. So this is a unified GUI that works on both. About performance, Enyo implements the flyweight pattern. It's pretty simple. It's simple. You won't regenerate view elements for all the existing objects, but only for the few ones that are actually displayed. That means they will be reused to display other objects when the view has changed. And it's not the same as a lazy loading. It is used even if there's nothing to be loaded. So using this permutation of the flyweight design pattern is the result of WebOS's experience, and it can avoid to overstock the DOM. So if you use some versions of jQuery Mobile, for example, a DOM node will be created for every element of a list, and it can go rather slow. So here is a little description about the flyweight implementation. Here the setup item is a function that will be called each time an element will be displayed. and it will populate items property on the fly, so that DOM elements will be rewritten and not. There is no need for one DOM element for every list element. And what won't Enyo bring yet? So it won't bring any declarative GUI programming. That means you don't have a way now to use enhanced HTML elements just like you would with Dojo Mobile. There is for now a simple theme, a single theme. That means you don't have a theme for iOS, a theme for Android, etc. Just like you would with Dojo Mobile. However, it will bring you a direct way of designing your user interface, and just as Dojo, less is used here for theming, so you can theme the application for the needs of your graphical requirements. So it's already finished. Thank you for listening. If you have some questions, or there are some extra slides, if you want. Okay.